Hi, it's Russ Scheider from Clear Vision Coaching. It's Saturday morning and I'm sharpening my tools. Have something I'd love to share with you, just a few minutes on our seller interview, some improvements that I've made to the seller interview form that we use. Now, this form is not only used to gather information, but to negotiate with motivated sellers from whom we buy properties. So let's get right into it. For reference, um, this is one of my favorite books of the year, Never Split the Difference, Negotiating as if Your Life Depended on It by Chris Voss. Chris was an FBI hostage negotiator, which are some pretty critical negotiations. And he and his son have transferred or translated that into the business world. And it's just phenomenal. Chris talks a lot in the book about emotional intelligence, something that he calls tactical empathy. And today we're going to use one of his techniques of calibrated questions. The other resource is the Closer Survival Guide by Grant Cardone, 100 Ways to Ink the Deal. This is phenomenal. If you're in sales in your day job, read it, listen to it, and then read it and listen to it again. I love the audiobook because I like the way Grant Cardone barks it out at you, and just hearing him say it is just so much better than reading a book. But I'm going to use something from this book that's actually a pretty old school sales technique. So let's jump right back to the seller interview. So the seller interview is things like seller name, property address, bedrooms, and baths. And back to Chris Voss for a minute, the FBI negotiator. He teaches us to ask open-ended questions, and he has updated that to call them calibrated questions. And a calibrated question is a question with a purpose, but it is open-ended. It's not a yes or no question. It doesn't have a preset true or false, yes or no sort of answer. It's open-ended. It starts a discussion. So I used to ask, how many bedrooms and baths is the house, and do you live there? It's a closed-ended question. So I would ask, do you live there? And the seller would say, no. Conversation stops. And then I have to ask another question. Well, do you rent it out? No. Well, does somebody live there? Yeah. This is not going well. So by changing the question and sharpening my axe, I can say or ask, who lives in the house? And this is the exact response I got to that question a few days ago. Who lives in the house? Well, my brother lives there, and he's in a wheelchair, and we're really trying to get him to move into an apartment because it's a two-story house, and he's sleeping on the sofa, and it's just a disaster. And we really need to, you see where that goes? It's such a great conversation starter. Who lives in the house? Well, I live there. Okay. Now I know the situation. Well, who lives in the house? Well, we used to have these tenants and blah, blah. It's just such a better transition into the conversation to then say, oh, you don't live in the house. Well, what is your mailing address, sir or madam, so that we can, send you an offer or whatever we're going to do. So that's the first one. The other thing that Chris Voss teaches, using tactical empathy and just kind of understanding human behavior, is people don't like to be asked why. People don't mind if you ask how or what or where or when, but they don't want to be asked why. Why did you do that? Why do you want that? Why? It's accusatory. We don't even mean for it to be, even if we say it as Chris teaches us with a smile in our voice, why is not the best way to answer a question. So I changed this from why are you selling to what is your reason for selling, which sounds kind of silly and wordy, but it has a different emotional impact. So what is your reason for selling? In our analysis, we still call that the why, but let's ask, what is your reason for selling? So moving on, this is straight from the mouth of Dusty Keefe, one of the coaches at Clear Vision Coaching. What would you like to see happen? Boom, what a beautiful tactical empathy calibrated question. What would you like to see happen? Now, that gets the seller talking about, well, it was my grandmother's house and really like to see it fixed up for a young family, or I don't really give a shit if you burn it down. Whatever they would like to see happen, it really gives us insight into a problem we can solve. What would you like to see happen? Gives me a problem I can solve, because our entire job here is to solve the seller's problem. So what would you like to see happen? Thank you, Dusty, for that wonderful calibrated question. And then the last thing that I've changed or updated on our seller interview is a question that I typically work into the conversation somewhere anyway, but I'm using it in a very particular way. Grant Cardone in the Closer Survival Guide references a really old school sales technique called the hat in hand close. And the hat in hand close, not this kind of hat, but my grandfather wore a hat, a fedora, to work every day along with his white shirt. That was what men did in those days. So most salespeople were men, many, many years ago. And you would go into your prospect's office and you'd hang your coat and your hat on a hook for the duration of the sales call. And after all the objections and we're not going to close this deal, and really not interested, say, well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. And you would take your hat in your hand, and before you put it on your head, you would say, well, I have one more question. Well, this is the hat in hand. Have you considered listing the house with a realtor? It is a close-ended question intentionally. And I also use the word why intentionally. Have you listed the house with a realtor, or considered listing the house with a realtor? And why not? And what that does for us, if the answer is yes, I've considered listing a house with a realtor, that your offer is too low, and that's probably what we're going to do. And in that case, I would say, great. Do you need a realtor recommendation? I know some great ones, and I can recommend them to you. And if they say no, I'm not going to list the house with a realtor, then I want to know why not. Well, we need to sell it fast. We can't mess around with listings, and they're going to want us to do all these repairs, and whatever their reason not to list with a realtor is a problem I can solve. So then with my hat in hand, figuratively, I circle back around to, well, let's talk about this again. What would you like to see happen? And we go through our negotiation again. So I hope that's helpful. If you're a coaching student, you have been through the training on all of these questions and how to use them. If not, as I like to say, I'm not coin operated. You don't have to put a coin in the slot to get information. If you need help with this, just reach out and let us know. Have a great day.